there's talk of a amnesty for farm workers, undocumented migrants. I think that is perhaps an issue where you could see MAGA unhappiness influencing what Donald Trump does. So I think it's a really interesting point when it comes to the relationship between Donald Trump and the MAGA base, what you might call his grassroots. Because we had a gathering just now in Tampa over the weekend, which was part of Turning Point led by Charlie Kirk. So lots of young MAGA supporters, some older also, there was a mix. And it comes after a week in which I think Donald Trump has seen his administration hold a few positions which do irk parts of his base. So you can look at the row over the Epstein files after the DOJ and FBI effectively said there's nothing to see here. It was a suicide. There's not a client list, which has obviously been talked about for some time in MAGA circles. You also have support for Ukraine from Donald Trump. It feels as though he is speaking more positively, and his actions are more to the side of we'll help Ukraine and more critical of Russia than perhaps at the beginning of his presidency. And there's also an ongoing row, or perhaps maybe a more accurate way to put it is concern from parts in the MAGA movement on immigration, that we could start to see the White House announce some sort of scheme to help the farming industries when it comes to undocumented workers, something which does not land well with parts of the base who think there has to be a clear approach for its deportations with no exceptions. So I think all these things were bubbling up over the weekend. Certainly it was the Epstein row which was the most vocal. You had various figures on stage in Tampa, such as Tucker Carlson, for example, talking about it. You had Megyn Kelly, the prominent journalist, effectively saying Pam Bondi needs to go. And there was a moment during the week when Donald Trump put out a supportive message towards Pam Bondi, and I don't think that landed particularly well in the room amongst these supporters. I think if we just go back to Donald Trump's first term, and perhaps even the path to get to the first term, there has been an ongoing fight with the deep state, as they would call it, and the sense that the establishment is out to get Donald Trump, and also that the establishment cannot be trusted, whether it's intelligence agencies or other, often malign intentions. You think about Donald Trump's first term, which was derailed effectively with these various investigations on Russia and so forth. And in the second term campaign, there was a big push for transparency on Epstein. Donald Trump was asked about the Epstein files and said, that was something he would look at, more would likely be released. He also appointed to key positions Kash Patel to the FBI, along with a fellow figure who had talked about conspiracies in Epstein as his deputy. And both of these appointments to the FBI had been talking about how there was a cover-up on Epstein. Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, went on Fox News. This is a clip that's been going around a lot recently, and said, we are going to release files on Epstein, which, the other guys, the Democrats, the Biden administration would not. She said these files, and it appeared to suggest the so-called client list, which is what lots of figures have been talking about, an alleged list which would have people that Jeffrey Epstein worked alongside or, collaborated in his escapades, a list of these people, and then he could have blackmailed them. And this feeds into the conspiracy, the cover-up idea. And Pam Bondi suggested that this client list was on her desk and would be released. Then, of course, you get a report a week ago saying, oh no, there's actually no client list at all. And this has really riled the base. They're saying, well, hang on a minute. Either Pam Bondi was wrong when she said there was a client list on her desk when she was on Fox News, or she is wrong now to say there is no client list. Now, some around Pam Bondi are trying to say, well, she didn't quite say that, perhaps you're misinterpreting her comments on Fox News. But there's a lot of anger towards her, and we're hearing from some of the figures Trump appointed to the FBI too. They feel as though Pam Bondi has made their job harder by going on TV a lot to talk about this, so getting lots of publicity, and they're not being able to deliver any goods on an issue which really goes to the heart of how lots of figures in MAGA see draining the swamp, see trying to change the way that DC works to get rid of these, intelligence figures, these deep state figures that they think are out to get Donald Trump. So the question is, has Donald Trump now joined the establishment and the deep state? Now, I don't think it is quite to the point where people are turning on Donald Trump per se, but certainly we're at the stage where lots of figures want to see pound Bondi gone. That's not the impression the US president gives that he's about to do. And this row looks as though it's going to keep going, and they want more answers and more transparency. They feel as though Donald Trump promised transparency in his second term, and they're not quite getting some of those campaign pledges right now.
We're going to supply weapons to NATO at a large amount. They're going to deliver the weapons, and they're going to pay for 100% of the weapons. So, a little different.
There's certainly a feeling that there has been a shift. So if we go back to the infamous Oval Office meeting now with Zelensky at the beginning of the year, that was a point where, lots of figures in Europe really looked on with horror, thinking America's turning its back on Ukraine. You had Donald Trump and particularly J.D. Vance, who was in the meeting, really saying to Zelensky, come on, be a bit grateful. We've given you all this support. You're not doing enough. And at points, the mood music around that period felt as though it was slightly more positive about the business opportunities of Russia than what they could do with Ukraine. You've also had Donald Trump saying, oh, these are two kids in the playground, you've got to let them work it out, he can't waste his time on it. Now it does feel as though Donald Trump is more pro-Ukraine than he has been. I think that goes a bit back to the minerals deal, the fact that now Ukraine has been brought into some kind of business arrangement with America. There is a deal, as we might want to call it, but also just frustration with Russia and Putin, and this feeling from Donald Trump that his time is being wasted. But of course, this does not land particularly well with parts of the Maga movement who, if you think about the things they care most about, immigration is a huge one, but also an end to forever wars. They want an America First policy. And for many of these figures, that America First policy is interpreted as one where they're not spending all this money on wars far away. There's a focus on America. And therefore, the decision by Donald Trump to potentially send more weapons to Ukraine, that's not one that lands particularly well with some of these figures. I think there's just a concern that this is just going to run on with no end in sight, and therefore is the policy going to not look so different than that under the Biden administration, which is lots of money going to Ukraine, something which many American voters, particularly voters who back Trump, are a little bit skeptical about when you look at some polling.
There could be no better birthday present for America than the phenomenal victory we achieved just hours ago when Congress passed the one big, beautiful bill to make America great again.
I don't think we're at a point where this is the end for Donald Trump. I mean, effectively, he is still an incredibly powerful president. I think what we're seeing at the moment is a test of how far does this authority go? And, is there a limit? Is there a point where he starts to change tack again or so forth? And I think Donald Trump has always looked to, the MAGA base in terms of how far he might go. He's also someone, he does obviously change tack quite a lot. He just never really admits it publicly. You can contrast that, for example, with Keir Starmer in the UK, who has U-turned a few times, but then just keeps apologising for it. Donald Trump would not apologise for it. He was to say, well, I'm president, so is it actually even a U-turn? I'm just, doing what I want to do at all times. So I think on Ukraine, I mean, if Donald Trump can support Ukraine and that brings an end to the war in some form by pushing Russia on the table through the force of sanctions and so forth, there is a way that parts of the base could get on side with that because they just want it to be over rather than this forever war that goes on and on. So I think the jury is a bit out on that, but certainly the actions, if you combine that with intervention in Iran and so forth, I think Donald Trump is more of an interventionist than parts of the base would like. But there's always been hints that his definition of America First is a bit different than some of his backers. He sees it almost as trying to keep everyone guessing, because at that point, people never know quite what to do in response when it comes to foreign policy.
If a farmer is willing to vouch for these people, in some way, Christy, I think we're going to have to just say that's going to be good, right? We're going to be good with it.
I think where you might have an immediate test in terms of how much control does the base have over what the White House does is actually on immigration. And there's talk of a amnesty for farm workers, undocumented migrants. I think that is perhaps an issue where you could see MAGA unhappiness influencing what Donald Trump does. He's already addressed it to a degree. There was a cabinet meeting this month where he said, why is everyone talking about an amnesty? There'll be no amnesty. But certainly this is an area where I think there is an awareness in the White House that anything that looks as though it is a special deal for some figures who have entered America illegally, to help, big ag, as it was being described at the Turning Point conference. So almost this idea of these, vested interests by billionaires and the big agriculture field. I think there is a feeling that the base is really speaking for core Trump voters there, so they need to tread quite carefully. So what Donald Trump does or doesn't do there, I think, will give us an indicator of the power of MAGA.